Okay, well, Bryan Fox, and I'm currently one of the counselling team here, three of us, and enjoy providing support for students, and have done since we set the counselling service up in the late 90s. My time at the college goes back before that, and in fact before this building opened, because as an undergraduate I was at Lancaster University and came back for my last year where I was reading French and Latin and intent on doing all the things a conscientious undergraduate should do. And when I'd left to have my year abroad in France the year before, there was some musical activity at Bailrig, but not much. There was a choral society and a magical group and a mathematics lecturer who gave some piano recitals, but that was about it. When I came back in October 1970, there was this music block, an international subscription concert series featuring the likes of Victoria de Los Angeles and Alfred Brendel, presided over by the new director of music. He'd been there for 12 months, one John Manduell. And he had this vision for musical life at the university, which is set out from the city centre, which involved both this professional side for the community, but also fostering students who wanted to have lessons and pursue their talent. I'd always been involved in choirs and making music. In fact, I've been lucky enough to be at school with Richard Hickox and Paul Roberts, the pianist. I was never in their league, but I was able to sort of get involved in some of the activities that they led their way in. And so when he said, well, if anybody wants to come and have music lessons, just get involved. So I went and had some singing lessons, and soon got involved in some of his projects, which included overseas broadcasts, recordings for the transcription unit, and gradually I got to know him a bit better and was increasingly impressed by his energy, vision, drive, and his company. And when I eventually finished my degree and was waiting to see whether I'd been accepted on the master's course there, he asked me what I was doing for the next 6 months, because he had this college to set up. It was his final year. He'd just been appointed principal of the new Northern College of Music, as it was then. And he said, I haven't got any staff, would you like to come give me a hand? So in September 1971, I turned up at his home in Yorkshire to begin my 6-month contract. And it was an amazing opening to what he had in mind, what he was planning, and to life with the Manduells, because I felt very much at home. He and his wife Rena have 4 children. One was away at dance school down in Birmingham, but the other 3 boys were there, and lots of cats, and my office was their dining room. And I arrived on the 22nd of September and was immediately informed about what was going on, the arrangements that had been made so far, the new building that was being constructed down in Manchester. We got to visit it on a few occasions. And the plans that the principal had for staffing, equipping the place, bringing the two staff together. The only problem as far as the planning was concerned was that he was off to North America at the end of the week, and I was representing the Northern College of Music in his absence. And one of the things I had to do was order some pianos from Steinway's, 48 of them. And I got the whole list there. They'd all been approved by the Joint Committee, who were our authority at the time, representing Lancashire, Cheshire, Manchester and Salford. And he persuaded them that, the Joint Committee that is, that we needed these 48 grand pianos, 2 concert grands and 28 Bs, and it goes on. It's only about £100,000 worth in those days. And I needed to get this letter off to Steinway Hall to make sure that we had delivery of the pianos by September 72, which was the target date for the amalgamation of the two existing colleges, the Royal Manchester College of Music and the Northern School, and the opening of the new Northern College of Music. Because the title Royal was vested in the Royal Manchester College of Music and couldn't actually be adopted by us. We were too young for that. And so that's what I did. Unfortunately, whether it was early in his time as principal, we hadn't quite got the politics right, and so what he thought he'd had by way of approval was then came under the scrutiny of the finance committees of the local authorities. So there was a long deliberation over that, but we managed to come away with 24 of them anyway, including the 2 concert grands.
It's not bad going.
We were very well equipped at the beginning, and so there were then meetings, discussions. Sometimes I'd come down to Manchester to accompany him to the meetings with the acting principal of the Royal Manchester College of Music, John Ray, and Ida Carroll, who was principal at the Northern School of Music, and getting to meet their staff and setting up larger meetings with other staff. We had a conference which was at Giggleswick School, very near their home in Yorkshire, which was a memorable occasion. And by that time there was some very distinguished, some existing members of staff who had distinguished performing and teaching careers, the likes of Clifton Helliwell. Frederick Cox, although he'd stood down as principal, was still teaching on the vocal staff, and others whom you can read about in various publications. Michael Kennedy's book, and well, both of them actually, about the Royal Manchester College, the first 25 years of the RNCM as it became. And John Robert Blunn wrote a book about Northern accent covering the Northern School of Music. So it's all a good read. But we're also appointing new members of staff to the college. First head of strings was Cecil Aronovitz. The first head of vocal studies was Alexander Young, who was Stravinsky's first choice as Tom Rakewell in the Rake's Progress, and is on his recording. Philip Jones was the first head of wind and percussion. And Clifton Helliwell was the first keyboard head. And it was a very exciting time. For somebody who wasn't actually any great shakes as a mathematician at school, and I was more into languages, I finished up as I was known as the slide rule king. So when we were working at ratios, before we had calculators and so on, we worked on staffing ratios, that sort of thing. And it was, for me, it was an amazing learning time, an opportunity to meet some incredibly impressive people. And to work with somebody I'd no right to have any expectation of working with. Inspirational, kind, thoughtful, with incredibly high standards.
Yeah. It strikes me how you remember so many names of people that you've met throughout your time here, and I think that's...
It's not always that degree of recall, but I mean, they were such amazing people.
And I think that speaks for who we are now as an institution. You know, we're so community driven, and I think that it sounds like that's where our roots are as well. We've always been led by community.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think another thing that happened in the early stages was that when it came to establishing budgets and so on, setting up the basis of the college, those responsible for it, I mean, obviously the principal, but his senior administrative staff, we had our first college secretary was somebody called Air Commodore Mansell Vaughan, who'd come from the RAF, obviously, where he'd been in charge of personnel. And they managed to build up a very good budget, so that when later on, inevitably, as things became a little bit tighter, there was some fat that we were able to cut into without seriously damaging the essence of the college.
Yeah. So throughout your time here, you've had numerous roles.
Yes.
Do you have a favourite?
My 6 month contract was eventually extended for another 9 months because building delays and so on. The new college didn't open until January 1973, the 8th of January it was. And that's when the first students came together into this building. Cold as it was, because the heating plant didn't work terribly well, and really quite echoey because of all the granite-faced brick, but incredibly open and welcoming, and the atmosphere was incredibly positive, almost tangible as you walked in through the door. You came in through the doors from another entrance on Booth Street West, which is now underneath the Carol Nash recycle room, mezzanine walkway. And the Porter's Lodge was on the left, and what became the box office was on the right, just by the lecture theatre. And that's where they all flooded in.
You must have seen so many changes throughout the actual building itself.
Yes, I mean, I suppose the biggest one came with the provision of the library building. That was in Edward Gregson's time as principal, after Sir John had retired. And that provided, well, the library that we have now. The library was initially established where the staff room and IT are based now. And it was always a great resource, staffed by some lovely people. But actually having the new library is just amazing. Yeah. And it makes it the international resource it is now, as has been recognised by various YAML awards. And also having the additional improved facilities for keyboard teaching and having those studios there as well. So that was a big change, followed by our modular hall of residence, with all the individual rooms arriving on backs of lorries, wow, and then being slotted into the framework which was built up.
And was that the halls that's there now?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And then the bolt-on bit at the front with the other two marvellous studios, and the extra rooms on the Oxford Road wing. And then the transformation of the concert hall and the rear space areas and all the opera theatre supporting accommodation, which is amazing, I think.
Yeah. And do you think if you could show all of this to, you and when you were in the beginning stages of setting the RNCM up, is this what you envisaged, or do you think it's beyond that now? Could you have even imagined anything like
there had
this?
always been plans to have an extension, because this building was never big enough. When we opened in 1973, we were able to retain the Royal Manchester College of Music building down where the University Theatre is now. And that was due for demolition when they put in the new urban motorway, the 57. And they wanted to bulldoze it so they get a nice straight run through. But if you look at the building and the way the motorway goes across now, you will notice the Carroll curve, because Ida Carroll put up a huge fight and managed to get them to build the motorway round the Northern School of Music.
Oh, that's amazing.
She's an indomitable woman, not to be trifled with. So we retained those for a while, until I think both buildings were requiring too much maintenance, and we were able then to vacate to the Princess Road County Primary School that was on Princess Parkway opposite the row of shops, where Isabel Bailey had actually been educated at one stage, the soprano. And that took mainly the overflow opera work, which always requires plenty of space.
Yeah.
And then in 1981, with the Moss Side riots, we felt we needed to vacate that before it was burnt down.
Yeah.
And we moved to a Roman Catholic high school that wasn't being used at the time, called St. Ignatius, and that has since become Holy Trinity. That's on Lloyd Street, behind the dental hospital. And we were there for a while, again, mostly with the opera unit. I remember Malcolm Fraser doing a memorable outdoor production of Turn of the Screw using the roof of the building, and I'm sure health and safety wouldn't allow it now, but it was absolutely stunning. And then we moved to a building on Grosvenor Street, which was built by the ancient Order of Oddfellows. We didn't call it Oddfellows Hall, but the Grosvenor building. It had been occupied by the Museum of Science and Industry before they moved into Castlefield. So again, that was mainly opera with some language teaching. There was an organ in the basement, I think, and some of the library overflow stock. And having been PA to the principal, when he arrived in Manchester, he had a proper secretary and a professional assistant. And I took up the role of accommodation officer, which was actually looking after all the spaces for teaching and practice. And because the principal felt that the RNCM, as we became, should provide not just really international quality teaching for future musicians, but also make a contribution to the cultural life of the community. He also had a vision of staging professional performances, including student performances. And so he saw this as an art centre as well. Of course, local authority-based conservatoires, even the Northern College of Music, weren't staffed to run a community outreach programme. So he needed to turn to the existing staff to see how he could actually get this to work. And there were three of us who were so taken with the vision that we gladly volunteered to help. So in the morning I'd be in at 8 o'clock, get the day job done, and then put the black tie on and DJ and do front of house management in the evening. So they were long days, but some very exciting things. He attracted very quickly groups like Northern Dance Theatre, who are now Northern Ballet. They were based in Hume and used this as their performing base in the theatre. We also had visits by London Contemporary Dance Theatre, Ballet Rambert. We also, for a couple of years, had visits by Royal Opera, because he had very strong connections there. And in fact, his connections meant that the first public performance in this building was before it officially opened, on the 19th of November 1972, which was given in a very resonant concert hall by the London Sinfonietta to mark the 50th anniversary of the first broadcast in Manchester.
Oh, wow.
And it was followed by a wonderful banquet in the refectory, as it was called then, with white tablecloths and the great and the good all sitting down. And there are photographs in the archives anyway. I think one or two of them I took on my Pentax. But that was an amazing occasion.
So how did you get from your time as PA to the principal all the way to counsellor?
Long and interesting history. I mean, I suppose I think I'd be a sort of health and safety nightmare. I remember getting caught in an electrical explosion in 1981 when I was doing some of my front of house work. And then 2 years later, my normal mode of transport to and from the college was on a bicycle. And in March 1983, on my way home one evening, I had an argument with a motorist who was doing something he shouldn't have done. And unfortunately it was before crash helmets, so I picked up some head injuries that weren't at all helpful. And had 3 months off work, and then came back at the beginning of the summer vacation to my accommodation officer role, which by then had actually included contractual work with external organisations, BBC and so on, other visiting companies. And although I think cognitively I was more or less okay, I didn't have the stamina. And gradually it became clear that I couldn't carry on doing what I was doing, so some of the front of house work actually went to a proper front of house manager, and I reduced my duties slightly. And then over time I stopped doing the accommodation officer job. That was in about 1987, so I'd had a good stint at it. And did some work in the library and with the administrative registrar, and I also carried on doing a bit of French teaching, which I've been doing since 1974, because the principal said, well, your degree was in French, weren't you? And our French tutor just left to go back to Belgium, so you can teach the singers, can't you? And then eventually he said, well, we're going to do an opera in French. Would you like to coach it? So that was the first production of Dialogue des Carmélites. And I've always enjoyed that. That's been fantastic, working with the singers. Anyway, there I was working in the administrative registrar section, doing a bit of personnel work. I also was involved at one stage with admissions. And after the Education Reform Act came in 1989, there was even more pressure on staffing and so on. And I suppose B. Fox's position became rather vulnerable because I was a supernumerary. And Lewis Anderson, bless him, managed to find an external trust called the Shaw Trust, who would actually support part of my employment costs and therefore mitigate the impact of me being not a loafer. I think I was doing a reasonably good job, but above and beyond establishment. And when I was assisting him, he arranged some senior staff training, and one of them was actually on supporting students. Mm-hmm. And we had a splendid weekend away in Buxton, and he said, look, when you've got all the arrangements sorted out, pop in on some of the sessions, you might find them interesting. And there was one given by a counsellor from Middlesex Polytechnic on student counselling. Mm. And it was like a light bulb moment. And I thought, oh, I really have to find out more out about this. Mm. And I went and did an RSA course off my own bat. And then applied to Wigan Polytechnic, Wigan and Lee College, I think it was actually, which was one of the accredited training establishments, and got a place, you see. And then I went to see Lewis and said, oh, could I have half a day off a week to go? And he said, no, I don't think you're ready for this yet. So I sort of muttered under my breath and went back and applied again the following year. And then I think the problem was at the time that Karen Humphreys was also away on a training course at the University of Manchester, so I thought 2 was a bit excessive. But she completed hers, and then I managed to go to Wigan and train there. And began setting up the counselling service after that.
There you go. It's amazing. You've done so many things here. Do you have, I suppose counselling probably is the answer, but do you have a favourite role from your time?
Well, it's incredibly fulfilling, and I so admire what our students do, and certainly as far as singing is concerned, would love to be able to, but could never emulate what they imagine they managed to achieve. But if there's some way in which I can actually help them achieve their dream and fulfill their careers, then that's incredibly rewarding. Yeah. I love doing that. I have enjoyed working with some of the big international bookings we had. The first World Association of Symphonic Bands and Wind Ensemble Conference to be held in the UK took place here under the guidance of Tim Renish, who is another unforgettable head of school and conductor of this place, has taken on board. That was great. BBC Young Musician of the Year started here. Yeah. And working with the competitors and the jury and the audiences who that attracted. Coaching with some marvellous directors and students. I think the biggest one was probably Carmen, with Katie Rudge and Sipho Fubezi and others. Stefan Jansky, unforgettable, inimitable, working his crowd scenes and the magic there with Clark Rundell at the pit. I don't know. I mean, there have been so many marvellous experiences. Yeah. I've mentioned those. I just think I'm an incredibly lucky guy. So from that moment, standing looking at the class lists at Bailrig and hearing over my shoulder, well, dear boy, what are you doing for the next 6 months? To where I am now, you couldn't script it. Yeah. It was just amazing.
It is incredible and totally inspiring.
Well, just very, very lucky. Very lucky.
shall we do a bit of a quick fire?
Fire away, sure.
Some questions.
Yeah.
Put you on the spot here.
Yeah, go on then.
Okay. So, I was going to say what's your favourite event, but you've listed a few, but if you had to choose one concert or performance that is your absolute favourite, which would it be?
Well, the Mahler that reopened the concert hall was certainly an amazing experience, because we hadn't had the concert hall for the best part of a couple of years, really. And I remember it in the early days with the London Sinfonietta, when there was that amazing flutter echo, which John Bow, the first recording manager, managed to mitigate with his acoustic treatment. And then seeing the concert hall revealed in its new state was amazing anyway. And then to sit in seats A26 and A27, which is right in the front row, this huge orchestra, and chorus up in the balcony, and my wife and I were sitting there, and I thought, this is going to be so lopsided. And then actually hearing the sound, and the clarity of sound, and the beauty of the sound, and the power of the music, that blew me away.
Good answer.
There have been some memorable times in the theatre as well. I mean, Billy Budd was astonishing. My school friend, Richard Hickox, conducting his first opera, which was Aida here. So amazing.
Well, okay. Another question.
Go on then.
Who do you think you would say is the most memorable or inspiring person that you've met through your time here at the RNCM? Whether that's a colleague or a student, anyone?
John Manduell. Yeah. No doubt there. I mean, there have been some wonderful people, but he just, I think, my greatest good fortune, I think, was to meet him.
Well, that's lovely.
I had no idea that saying yes to John Manduell's offer would actually provide not just a living, but a life and a lifestyle. I met my wife here. She was training to be a singer with Joseph Ward at the time, another illustrious head of the School of Vocal and Opera Studies. She was Hippolyta in Midsummer Night's Dream, which they produced in May 1973. She was the first Babal the Turk in an unforgettable production of the Rake's Progress, which the college then took down to Sadler's Wells for a week just to let the London colleges know what Manchester was up to. That was December 73. And we then got married in just after Christmas, because she was then off to Glyndebourne for 3 years. It's been a wonderful place to work with some absolutely fabulous people and some unforgettable experiences.
And I think it's so special that not only have you, you've got this whole life from being involved with the RNCM, but that can be said for so many people within our community.
Absolutely.
And this story will just continue as our journey as an institution continues. And I think that's what we want to celebrate in our 50th year, isn't it?
Great.
And going forward. It's all these magical moments
But
that,
it's something about music, you see. when the college was being set up, we had a crest designed by a chap called Ellis Tomlinson, and it needed a motto. And the college motto is Fovit Musica Omnes. Had to be in Latin, of course. But fundamentally, music enriches everyone.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what we stand for and what we celebrate. Well, it's been great to talk to you, and
thank you.
I'm sure that
real pleasure.
so many people will really enjoy hearing these stories.